Okay, I've got a verification that we are now live streaming, and so with that, we are going to turn it over to Chair Westerman to begin the meeting.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to part 2 of our Decision Process Task Force meeting. It's good to see everyone's logos, initials, and we're ready to start this afternoon with name and something surprising about yourself. So my name is Gwen Westerman, and something a lot of people don't know about me is that I was a chemistry major as an undergraduate, and I love benzene rings and reaction formulas and numbers. Okay. Jason, you're up next.
Good morning, or good afternoon, I should say. I'm Jason Adkins, Executive Director of the Minnesota Catholic Conference. I'm a pretty boring person, so surprising. I like to, I'm a member of the Minneapolis Rowing Club, so despite my very unathletic look, I do actually get out on the water and enjoy rowing.
Thank you. Okay. Julie.
It's just a weird thing to share in a group full of a number of fiber artists and legit artists here, but I'm a crafter, and I have now just taken to building myself an army of little gnome friends in my basement. But again, I really feel like after hearing that about all of you artists, you've got to find have a craft night with the group.
Okay.
That's crochet, by the way. I'm more into crochet than the other stuff. So.
Right. Kate Bean. Oh.
Hello, everyone. So I am Kate Bean, and something about me is that I grew up as a punk rocker, and hanging out at a punk rock club called the Gilman Club in West Berkeley, California.
And I skipped over Dana.
Yes, I'm Dana Badgerow, and having retired from the Better Business Bureau, I'm now managing a thrift store. But the thing no one knows about me, or very few, was that when I was in law school, I was actually a country western singer. I played rhythm guitar and sang with a group called the Missing Otis Trio.
Next meeting, we'll have to get out all our instruments. Lindsay Dyer.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Let's see, something surprising. I have a dream of visiting Antarctica, and it's just like my biggest bucket list item. And a ticket is pretty expensive. So one of the ways that I'm planning to finance that is through my textile art. So that over the past couple of years, I've specifically been trying to build up enough inventory to either have a show or, get the Etsy thing going to help pay for my ticket.
Oh. Okay, Jessica.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Intermill. I was going to tell you about how the trip that I told you about to Japan yesterday was actually part of a 10-country study abroad trip that we got on a ship and went around the world. But I can also tell you that I have a wiener dog that is trying to get into my room right now.
Okay. Dr. Jolly.
So I'm Eric Jolly, and I'm fluent in American Sign Language, which means I may be the only person you've ever met who's been called stupid by a chimpanzee. I worked with sign language chimpanzees, and the saddest part of the story is they were right.
Oh. Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Jones. I am a bluegrass fiddle player, although not a very good one.
Yep, on our way to a band. Tish.
Hello, my name is Tish Jones, and I think the thing surprising me most is my first time in life having my fingernails painted as an adult. So that's a surprise today.
Representative Lee.
Thank you, everyone. So something surprising about me, I was born in a refugee camp in Thailand, and I have 18 siblings, 9 brothers and 9 sisters.
Bless your mother and father. Okay. Commissioner Roberts Davis.
Hi, I'm Alice Roberts Davis, and something surprising about me is that about a decade ago, I taught French in the community college near my home, and I fell really quickly from there. I am barely proficient now, but I was smart enough to not teach them how to call me stupid. So I never got called stupid by any of my students.
Zing. Daniel.
Good afternoon, Chair Westerman and folks. Daniel Yang, Senior Advisor to Mayor Melvin Carter here in St. Paul. I have been to over 115 countries across all 7 continents, including Antarctica, Lindsay, and make sure to do everything you can to get down there. It was incredible. So looking forward to hearing your stories from there soon.
Thank you. Senator Nelson is not able to join us today, and so our last surprising tidbit will come from the Lieutenant Governor.
Hi, everybody. I was a vocal music major in college. That's what I started off doing, and then it wasn't as fun anymore because it's what I love to do. So I changed my major, but I can belt out an aria with the best of them. So that's my fun fact.
Great. Thank you all for sharing. I think that's one of the things that we miss out on Zoom meetings is we don't have a chance to chat and share about what we have in common and what we get excited about. And these little exercises help bridge that gap for us. Okay, our first order of business today is to finalize the task force charter. And Eric has the document on the screen with changes from the first meeting, suggested changes, and then if there is anything else that you came across that you think needs to be addressed in the document. Jennifer.
Yes, thanks. We wanted to point out that in the deliverable section, where we talk about the first deliverable about revisions to the capital policies and procedures on the addition, alteration, or removal of monuments, memorials, and works of art on the Capitol grounds or in the state capitol. We would just like to see some recognition that works of art in the state capitol is actually shared authority with the Minnesota Historical Society. So we were wondering about adding some language that potentially leaves that as it is, but says something like working closely with other entities where authority is shared.
Okay. Eric, are you going to add that in as a?
Yep, I'm getting that in sort of writing it out on my paper copy here.
Okay. Yes, that within the state capitol, that is a shared responsibility. Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. Other comments or observations? Okay. Jason sent us a suggestion. And so you can see the conversation there. Jason, do you want to add anything to what's there?
Yeah, I offered those amendments just to make it clear that, well, we shouldn't have people sandbagging the process or dragging an issue, especially when there's a strong, overwhelming consensus among the task force. At the same time, the way consensus was used in that section was not the generally accepted common usage. So if someone were to go back and look at the task force report, they might say, well, there was consensus on that issue, but consensus generally means unanimous support. So I just wanted to clarify that I thought some minor edits around how we understood consensus in this context would be helpful, and then making sure that sometimes we reach consensus and we move things forward. It shouldn't necessarily impute specific support for any proposal to any one member because of interests of comity and collegiality and time and resources. So I hope those changes were helpful.
Okay, yes. And then there's another option to that. The presence of consensus represents a decision of the task force as a collective body rather than support of a proposal by any individual member. And that suggestion is just to put the tone of the sentence into a positive form.
And I certainly accept that as a friendly amendment. That's just fine with me.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other observations or comments about those suggested changes? Okay, don't hear any. Do we need a motion to approve?
I think at least the recommendation was maybe that we sort of just would be more reaching consensus rather than doing a formal motion here, but would certainly can circulate for folks to sign off on afterwards.
All right, thank you, Eric. I appreciate everyone's attention to the charter and the suggestions that you've made. Helps give us a good working document. And Eric will follow up afterward for email signatures.
I would note that there are a couple hands up now.
Oh, there we are. Okay, yes. Auditor Blaha.
That brings up a good question. So as we talk about coming to consensus, how will we know in the meeting that we've done that? Will you just ask and say, are we on the same page, and just kind of ask for objection, or just so I can track the meeting well, like on something like this, what's going to be like the cue or the mechanism for just making sure we've got consensus and we know that we're done with something?
Good question. Eric, do you have a suggestion?
I mean, I think this is really up to the direction that the task force wants to go. If folks would want to do more formal motions, it certainly could do that, or
or to ask for additional comments or other suggestions, and hearing none.
I think that, for instance, Chair Westerman, if you simply tell us you think that you've heard consensus, that will be good enough for me. You know, if it's like it seems like we're there, and just so I have that cue, and then I know we're done, and then I won't circle back, rehash anything.
And
I agree.
Good. And Dana, you had your hand up.
I did. There's a change on the next page, which I don't think we discussed. It does deal with consensus, but it's a little confusing to me. And I was kind of wondering if I could understand the intent behind it. And it's kind of an unusual process, 2 members by a seconded motion, et cetera, et cetera. What does that process envision?
Jason, would you like to address that, since that's your suggestion?
So the original language is there. My suggestion was just to make it if there is a lack of consensus on a particular thing, not give more members an opportunity to ask for a vote besides simply the chair. So if there's 2 or more members who want to ask for a vote because they don't necessarily think there's consensus or want to get the pulse of the rest of the group, then there's an opportunity for more people than just the chair to call that question, so to speak.
And the need for 2 members is what?
Well, you should have a motion and someone else to second it, so it's not just one person, you know, trying to. It's not just the initiative of one person. So if I made a motion to ask for a vote or to see if there was consensus or something else, I couldn't just do it alone. Someone would have to second my motion.
I understand. So it's the mover and the second. Those are the 2 people.
Correct.
Oh, sure. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. Then it seems that we have come to a consensus on the changes. Okay, and we can move forward then. Thank you all for your close reading. I really appreciate that. And the next item on our agenda is a CAP board presentation by Paul Mandel.
Paul, I think we need your audio on.
Too. I made the same mistake last time. The Capital Area Architectural and Planning Board was established by the 1967 legislature. It's a small non-cabinet planning and regulatory agency responsible for the architectural design and long-range planning for the capital area. The legislature sets the CAP board boundaries, and the board's responsibilities are found in Minnesota Statute 15B. The board's mission is fourfold, and I will read them. First, to preserve and enhance the dignity, beauty, and architectural integrity of the Capitol. The buildings immediately adjacent to it, the Capitol grounds in the capital area. Second, to protect, enhance, and increase the open spaces within the capital area when deemed necessary and desirable for the improvement of the public enjoyment. Third, to develop proper approaches to the capital area for pedestrian movement, the highway system, and mass transit system so that the area achieves its maximum importance and accessibility. And fourth, to establish a flexible framework for growth of the capital area that will be in keeping with the spirit of the original Cass-Gilbert design. The CAP board consists of 12 members chaired by the Lieutenant Governor and is composed of 4 gubernatorial, 3 mayoral appointees, and 4 legislative members. 3 architectural advisor professionals advise the board, and the staff serving the board consists of 3 people, now 3 people as of today, an intermediate planner, principal planner, and myself, the executive director, the last 2 being the only full-time members. The CAP board has exclusive zoning jurisdiction and design review over both the state government complex and the surrounding commercial and residential neighborhoods. The agency guides this planning and design with a comprehensive plan and zoning and design rules for the 60-block area surrounding the Minnesota State Capitol building. These 2 documents are currently in the process of a 3-year-long rewrite, and the recent biennial report has, of which you all received, I think, or have access to, has the 7 key principles that guide the 2040 comp plan. In 2011, the administration department took the lead with the CAP board and Historical Society in a coordinated effort on what led to the successful restoration of the Capitol building that was completed in 2017. The CAP board has sole responsibility for memorials on the Capitol grounds, while inside the Capitol building, as has been noted, for the ceremonial and historic public spaces, that falls on the CAP board as well as the Historical Society. And for the non-historic public spaces created in large part during the restoration efforts, the administration department, through the Preservation Commission's Art Subcommittee, has responsibility, with review by CAP Board and Historical Society. The board's operating budget is $351,000 per year. Over its 53 years, the CAP Board has taken leadership in guiding design of all 7 new bridges in the I-35, I-94 common sections, the History Center, the Judicial Center, 7 other new state buildings, 12 memorials, routing and design of the light rail transit system through the capital area, and countless public and private improvements throughout the area. You can see the boundary of the capital area on the aerial photo. The next slide. If we can have the next slide. And you also see the grounds outlined that are in blue, as well as the state buildings. The dotted red line represents the CAP Board boundaries. It's important to note that the Capital Area Planning Board has policies, procedures, and standards that apply to new memorials, the landscape elements, and building materials on the Capitol campus. But since there have never been any requests for the board to alter, reinterpret, or remove any commemoratives on the Capitol grounds, there is no procedure whatsoever to address such action, all of which would be under the purview of the board. It is also important to note that those works that do exist on the Capitol grounds today came about in one of 2 ways. Some were gifted to the state before the CAP Board existed in the 60s, or otherwise the others that have been created since then came through the efforts of either individuals or groups of individuals with an idea and a request to either the board or the legislature to commemorate some historic person or group of people. For most of these, the client or advocates were committed to both the process that generated designs through an architectural design competition, as well as the time needed to secure the necessary funding and to work with the CAP Board and advisors and others to design and complete the project. On average, that meant 3 to 5 years and generally $400,000 to $600,000. I would add that fundraising has ranged from license plate revenues for the World War II Memorial to charitable gambling revenues for many of the veterans memorials, to T-shirt sales for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, voluntary assessments of its members for the Firefighters Memorial, large amounts of private monies for the Military Family Tribute, for instance, legacy monies for the project that now still in design and waiting for construction, the Medal of Honor, and often a state match with clients from corporate leaders to single moms. In conclusion, the board, staff, and advisors have worked to ensure that the quality of services and livability for all who work, live, visit, and play here is of the highest quality, as found in our vision statement that you see here for the board's 2040 comprehensive plan. I'll now turn it over to Peter and Linda for some more details.
Thanks, Paul. More information about the rest of CAP Board's scope. Like a municipality, CAP Board creates a comprehensive plan that guides amendments to a set of zoning and design standards. So we are both a planning body and a regulator. And so my position with the CAP Board as principal planner is to ensure that both proactive long-range planning and support of the comprehensive plan is conducted, but also when project proposals arrive, to serve as administrator of the zoning design rules for the Minnesota State Capital Area. So here's the 7-part structure we've been developing in the community and with the board and the committee over the last 3 years. The structure of the 2040 comprehensive plan for the Minnesota State Capital Area. There are 7 primary principle statements that each have grown into policy chapters. The plan update process began over 3 years ago, as Paul mentioned, and we are nearing the end of approvals of the planning drafts. Over those 3 years, we've conducted several planning tracks, which are deeper proactive dives into critical issues or changes facing the capital area. One is such as the Rice Street commercial vitality planning that really started our process. It gave rise to the development framework for the Capital Rice District. which we will see in the next maybe 3 to 5 years, redevelopment of the Sears site, which is really the western quarter of the capital area. The rethinking of Interstate 94 is a project that MnDOT's leading and we are participating in. And there's been work looking at commuter mobility and the parking issue. The final planning track we conducted that Linda will speak about next was work with the Minnesota Historical Society, gauging the visitor experience on the grounds with a focus on the upper and lower mall. Before we do that, I'll give you a quick sense of how we work with stakeholders in general. These are examples of planning tracks that had more heavy levels of engagement inside the Beltway, so to speak, in the capital area. Some were conducted with a local community, some were interagency initiatives. The interactions with stakeholders in the community they vary widely by project, from with Rice Street with street surveys, engaging passersby near the transit station on Rice Street, to design workshops, to creative placemaking efforts, murals expressing community values in storefronts, visions of citizens for Rice Street. And on the other hand, a 2-year staff-based 6-agency initiative with different disciplines, with different agencies, including Department of Administration and Move Minnesota, tracking mobility goals. When special projects come up, we are by statute empowered to reach out for help, to collaborate with the many agencies nearby. Most of the planning tracks we've conducted in the last few years have a goal of forming the policy groundwork for comp plan chapters, and then subsequently the design and zoning regulations. And so again, we work proactively with stakeholders within our long-range planning, but we also will engage in more of a reactive setting, communicating with immediate neighbors and stakeholders when the development proposals when they do come in. And so next slide, we wanted to highlight specifically some of the recent commemorative works projects that have come in. As Paul mentioned, they are projects initiated from the outside of state government, although often are facilitated then through a thorough process of competitions involving large implementation teams serving a committee. So Linda Spohr is now going to show some of the work related to the planning track on the visitor experience, an effort which yielded interesting information relative to commemorative art and the values of visitors to the Capitol.
Thanks, Peter. So in the spring of 2019, we began the process of developing and collecting surveys of visitors to the Capitol building and the mall. And we worked closely with the Department of Administration and the Minnesota Historical Society to determine which visitors to survey and how we were going to do that. So we identified 6 groups, and we have thus far surveyed 4 of them. So we received 447 surveys from visitors to the Capitol building and 100 surveys from visitors to the mall. And we also surveyed a small number of lobbyists and legislators on behalf of their visitors. So while we only received 100 surveys on the mall thus far, we had planned this year to go back out and collect more surveys, but of course, in the days of COVID now, that is not a possibility. So we have a bit of a smaller number with just 100, but still good information for you as you begin the process to hear what some people have said. The focus of the surveys overall was the visitor experience. So they covered much more than just commemorative art. But the mall survey did have 3 questions about art on the mall. And we won't go into all the detail now, but the types of questions addressed both the physical environment, like the walk among the memorials and the signage, interpretive information, as well as the content of the memorials and how visitors felt about that content, whether they felt that it was relevant to them or representative. We also received statements about what they felt was done well and what was missing. And we will share all of this information with you. The surveys, which were done in a one-on-one format, as I mentioned, are on hold now, but we do hope to collect more data in the future. And of course, the Public Engagement Task Force will be conducting their own public engagement as well. But since the announcement of the
creation of these 2 advisory task forces in June. We have been accepting feedback via email and an online form. And the form asks, please provide input on the processes regarding the reinterpretation and modification of commemorative works of art on the Minnesota State Capitol grounds and/or on the development of the 2 related task forces on policy and community engagement. And since June, we have received not a lot of feedback so far, but we have 5 emails and 27 form responses. And again, you will be given all of that information as you move forward. And we'll head back to Paul now.
This was a fast run through of the Capital Area Architectural and Planning Board's scope of our overall work and how commemorative art fits into our functions. We will be talking more extensively later on today, but we are certainly available at any time and would be eager to answer questions about the capacities and protocols that we currently use for both the public participation in general, or for processes and policies that are in place as they relate to commemorative art, both in the building, on the grounds, and throughout the rest of the capital area. So with that is our initial presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, task force. What questions do you have or feedback do you have about the presentation?
This is Eric. My question is for Linda regarding the web solicitation and email solicitation of feedback. How has that been distributed? How did people come to know it was there and available for comment? Have we done outreach, and to which communities?
Yes, thank you. There has not been any specific outreach to communities up to this point. That is really going to be happening moving forward with the public engagement task force that was created. The way this was distributed, first, it was announced at board meetings, which was a public meeting. It was posted on our website, and it was sent also in a Gov delivery type of email, which is sent to anybody who has previously subscribed to the Capital Area Architectural Planning Board email list. So it was that was the 3 methods really: announcement at board meetings, posted on website, and then via email.
And Linda, Gov delivery has its own list that it's broadcast to 1,200.
1,200. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Paul.
Lindsay has her hand up.
Hi. So I had the same question, but I was also reacting to the complexity of the question, and I'm just wondering if there are any efforts to kind of put it into more plain language to potentially solicit more responses.
I can try to answer that.
Yeah.
I think we certainly wanted to allow the task force to guide how we do this. That was really the idea, was we were getting feedback, and we wanted to have an avenue for people that wanted to express themselves, getting calls and things like that since the summer. And so it was important that we had something up, but we certainly wanted to have the task force advise on how we reached out. I think that's always came up in the meetings about what should we do. And it was always to say, well, I think the task force needs to guide that.
I'll also remind people you are looking at the full staff of the CAP board.
Okay. Auditor Blaha, you have your hand up.
This may be kind of a more general question. For those of you, I know a lot of you here have been on other task forces and done this work. Are there some things that you've learned over time that are particularly effective in our work to help support the CAP board, or anything that you're like, oh, this actually was less helpful than we thought? Again, apart from the other great practices that I saw on the supporting documents, which I really suggest anybody watching this go through and read. They are really great ways to run anything. So yeah, tips from the pros. So I'm looking for.
see Kate has her hand raised.
Kate, is that a question, or are you going to respond to Julie?
I had a follow-up question.
Okay. So, Auditor Blaha, can you repeat your question so we can hear
well,
what?
we certainly don't have to answer it today, but the idea of, those of you who've done these task forces before, since I know several people on here have done that. Historically, is there a particular I thought on the product or the how we give the guidance that is particularly helpful, that's just good for a new person to know in how the task forces relate to the board?
I know that, this is Paul, I know that the Public Engagement Task Force has a very separate charge from this group, and they are looking to not sway into your area, but they are focused singularly on outreach, how to outreach, and gathering public input. I know that for a fact. So, and they met last week.
And I think when we have an opportunity to look at their charge, that might help answer some of those questions for us as well. All right, Dr. Bean.
Yeah, I just had a quick question as a new CAP board member myself. I just wanted some clarity around. I know when I initially saw the form, the survey form that was posted online, and it's great to get that clarification that the other task force will be working more on that. But in order to give any feedback on that, who would we communicate with? I guess I'm not really clear whether this task force and the public engagement task force are communicating at all.
Eric, do you want to address that? I think we spoke a little bit about it earlier.
Sure. I think specifically for the suggestions on the form could come to me or to Emmett or to Pete. Or, any of the three of us could probably receive the suggestions on that.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
And I would just add, this is Alice, that I am sitting on both task forces, and so one of my roles is to be the liaison between the two. I should be understanding what's happening on both of them, and if there's something that I need to bring as information between the two, I'll be the conduit for that.
I would like just make one point. On the CAP board website, we will always have on the homepage the latest, either what we're doing other than the task forces, but also the latest on the task force, and that will then direct folks to a dedicated page that will grow as an archive. Whether each task force has its own page is going to be an open question that you should drive. But right now, it's really a parallel growing archive was the vision, unless we're directed otherwise. And Eric and I will collaborate, and Linda are collaborating on that, how that will grow. So your advice as we go, and who is listed as contact is going to be helpful.
Thank you, Pete. Any other comments or questions for the presentation? Okay, don't see any hands up.
I'm sorry, I would just say that the very questions that you're asking right now are the reasons why these task force exists. And so, this is clearly the guidance and the support that as the CAP board, we believe that we needed. But Auditor Blaha, to your question about how the task force work, how do we make sure we're getting, we're doing the right stuff here? I think we're going to answer that together. But I think the biggest piece is that, the state has been going in one direction for 162 years with regards to how this all works. And And I think that is, we want to try to disrupt some of those systems that have existed by having these conversations where outreach might look a little bit different. So, I think there's some things that we know work well because they've been successful in individual communities. But my hope is that, for the Public Engagement Task Force and as we are developing a process, we're keeping in mind people who, for a whole host of reasons, mostly because the system hasn't been designed by them or for them, myself included, that we're creating new ways to communicate and connect with folks and get that kind of feedback. So this is where your creativity and thinking outside of the dominant culture box is really helpful here.
And Madam Chair?
Yes.
This is Paul again. I would be remiss to, if you've been on the Capitol grounds this summer, you will have seen a lot of construction going on around the memorials. The Department of Administration, as the landlord, had funding for a major renovation of all the memorials, be it landscaping, safety issues, repairing bronze work, etc. A complete rehab of the women's suffrage garden, complete replanting of the workers' memorial gardens, and that some of that work is still continuing. They, as the landlord, maintain the grounds, and Historical Society, Jennifer Jones, who is part of this task force, and David Kelleher, who will be speaking with me later in our segment. From the Historical Society. Historical Society also does general upkeep at times, especially on the art pieces, the bronze work, etc., some general cleanings and things. So it's really a partnership of the three bodies.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for reminding us to keep all of our constituents in mind and the multiple ways that we can reach out to them and engage them so that we have broad representation in terms of input. Okay, any other questions or comments on the CAP board background presentation? Okay, don't see any hands, don't see any waves. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break and we'll come back again to continue our discussions. This is where elevator music plays.
We are going to continue the live stream and recording at this point.
This is Eric here. We still have a couple minutes left in the break here, but I see someone has joined by phone with a number ending in 6618. I'm just wondering if that person could identify themselves so we know who all is here.
Yes, hello, this is Eric Jolly. My internet just crashed. It's coming back, but until then I'll be by phone.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
I will rejoin manually, hopefully in the next 10 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll come back together. And we'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Nash Pearson from Microsoft for all his help with the technology for both task forces. This is an incredibly complex process to watch from behind the curtain, and we really appreciate all you do for us, Nash. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Gwen.
All right, Paul, you ready to resume?
Yes, Madam Chair. Linda was very good to, this is specifically for the question raised by the auditor. When we did those public forums, those were the best attempt that we could do, given that our board meetings since March have been virtual. It was not seen as really any kind of formal public engagement other than to give the public at large, whoever was inquiring, at least some means to send their input, even though it was passive, knowing also that the task forces were going to be starting up in the early fall, and they were going to be equipped to do much more interactive and live feedback and give and take and receiving it. So it wasn't really intended to do anything more than collect what we could, given our limited means. That said, David Kelleher will be joining me from the Historical Society, and we have a matrix that was worked on between our two bodies. And we're going to go through that, and I would ask you to hold questions unless we go really off the track, to hold your questions until the end, because it is a confusing situation. It is a shared responsibility, especially within the Capitol building, but it's all in statute. And so the first page shows you a graph, a chart. The second page that we will show you also explains in greater detail some of the footnotes and some of the statutory backgrounds. So David and I are going to be tag teaming just like we did when we presented this to the CAP board. So if we start at the top, and mind you, the acknowledged gap is on the Capitol grounds more than it is in the Capitol building. But we'll start at the top with the Capitol building and the historic and ceremonial public spaces. The CAP board has review and approval, Historical Society too, review and final approval. They are the final say. They also are responsible for the care and upkeep and the disposition of any monuments or memorials or works of art removed from the Capitol grounds. And the Department of Administration is, of course, the landlord. They are the ones responsible, and thank God they are the ones who maintain the Capitol building in the beautiful state that it is. Next, you go down to the temporary exhibits, and David, chime in whenever you need. The temporary exhibits inside the Capitol building's interior public spaces that were created by the restoration project, specifically the basement, and for the most part, the east wing of the third floor. The CAP board and Historical Society are advisory. The Department of Administration staffing the Preservation Commission, and the Preservation Commission's Art Subcommittee is responsible for the programming of those spaces with review and approval. So you have in the basement an exhibit that shows all the several of the construction workers. There were over 240, but there's 40 of them that are on display photographs. And there's a rotating series of rooms on the third floor, east wing. One is, I think, Muslims in Minnesota. Another one is in transition now, which is considered like an art gallery, rotating art gallery. And there's the Cass Gilbert Library, which has the two pieces, the Native American pieces that were removed from the governor's reception room, plus some interpretive material that was supplemented those two paintings, and then some smaller rooms. These are all public spaces that are available for lease, for rent at no cost by the public for up to 3 hours at a time through the Department of Administration. There's also a business center up there that has artwork that's, I think, on a rotating basis also. Then you have the Capitol building minor corridors, interior minor corridors and offices where either offices and such. These are Cap Board and Historical Society authority there is in review, as is the Department of Administration, and they are, again, the landlord. The Capitol building exterior, the Cap Board and Historical Society have sole responsibility for any changes to the Capitol building. And again, the Department of Administration for implementation, care, and upkeep. And then you get to the Capitol grounds, the mall, and excluding the public streets. Cap Board has extensive process, and it's the 2012, it was last revised in 2012 for commemorative works in the Minnesota Capitol area. There's a 2015 document that handles the art inside the Capitol building that's jointly delivered and developed by Historical Society and the Cap Board, and it's been in a revision since 2015. Still has not been updated to show the new public spaces, the Department of Administration spaces, or how the Capitol interiors were modified during the restoration. So that still needs to happen. But for the commemorative works outside, we have a process, and as I mentioned in my intro, we have had 12 memorials created and developed and built since I came here in 1987 through design competitions. And those come through a variety of means, usually through a design competition. The Cap Board is first approached, or a legislature might be approached and directs the Cap Board to come up with a site and design and construction. Funding has to be secured. The state doesn't fund these completely. They usually, if they put anything in, it will be a match to private dollars. The Cap Board approves a site based on the thematic groupings. We have the Capitol campus organized by themes. John Ireland Boulevard being reserved for Minnesotans, Cedar Street area being reserved for gardens. So you have the Women's Suffrage Garden, and you have now the Workers' Memorial Garden. The areas closest to the Veterans Building for peace and war veterans memorials, and then the Upper Mall at this point thematically grouped for executive branch, judicial, and governor and legislators. There have been no new memorials on the Upper Mall, what we call the Upper Mall, since I think the 50s or whatever. And then the Capitol Area Planning Board itself is responsible for any changes, new or existing, both review and approval through 15B for any changes to the Capitol grounds. That's the only piece that we have that would address what happens if you want to remove, alter, or change. Is that it's our responsibility, but we've never had any need or requests, so we have never developed how does one go about doing that. We are in charge of it. We are a responsible body, and you will be reporting your recommendations to us on that basis. If it is decided that something is to be removed from the Capitol grounds, the Historical Society would be responsible for determining the final determination of what happens to it, since it is state property. And as I noted before, both Historical Society and Department of Administration are involved in the care and upkeep of those spaces. Anything to add at this point, David?
Thanks, Paul. I would just sort of recap what you were saying by observing that this is a bit complicated, particularly if you don't work with the agencies and the the laws, underlying statutes on a day-to-day basis. But the hope with this matrix was to break down the areas which are each treated a little bit differently, and it's probably best to focus on the first row and the last row of this page of the matrix. So, and that is the historic and ceremonial public spaces and the outdoor Capitol Mall campus. Those are the areas that this task force, I think, would be focusing on most closely. And really going back to the historic and ceremonial public spaces, that's not only a descriptor that is set out in statute, but when the capital preservation process was underway, part of the setting of design guidelines was looking at the historic preservation aspect of the Capitol building and taking a look at different zones. They created a hierarchy of zones 1, 2, 3, and 4, and zone 1 being essentially the historic and ceremonial spaces that required the most care to preserve to the 1905 appearance of the building, which was one of the goals of the preservation of the building. Again, as you look at the last row of this matrix on the outside, that also is something that this task force is going to be working on, and that's a bit different, as Paul observed, that is more in the court of the CAP board itself, and the Minnesota Historical Society's role is that we have provided advice on preservation of the statues and memorials, and then for something that is determined to be removed by the CAP board, then we will work with the CAP board and admin on what happens to it and what some of the more technical aspects are. Linda or Eric, if you could go to the second page of this document. This is the boring part, but this is the statutory authority by which it's determined who does what. And if you look and go from the bottom up, Minnesota Historical Society statutory authority and CAP board statutory authority, those are the two things that govern the Capitol building and the Capitol Mall. And I think we've had in the early summer some further analysis and dissection of those words with some CAP board members and others, but I think what it says today is fairly clear. That is not to say that there could be some improvements in public access to that process and clarity of how someone accesses the process on a practical day-to-day basis if someone wanted to make changes. So I think that's a really quick overview of how this all works, and Paul and I would be happy to walk through it and answer questions. We always hear that this is confusing.
If you look at the second footnote, Capitol building interior spaces, you see there the listing of some of the historic spaces, the Rathskeller, the dining room, the judges and governor's dining room. It would also include the chambers, the court, the governor's reception room, and of course, the rotunda. Those were, as David described them, as the Zone 1 spaces. And again, I would just note, these are where cited by quotes, these are statutes. So this takes the legislature to change versus the policies that you have been given access to, which is the policies governing the commemorative works of art on the Capitol grounds or the policies governing art in the Capitol. Those are policy documents that have been modified several times each by either Historical Society and CAP board or just the CAP board. Questions?
See. Dr. Bean, I saw your hand first.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention one thing that, I know we're not here to discuss the Columbus statute specifically, but during the incident that happened on June 10th, I reached out to one of the tribal liaisons and to ask what paperwork was handed out to individuals who were wondering about the process. And what I found out was that it was the statute 15B, which is a 17-page document that was handed out to citizens to try and understand and read through. And I think that just speaks to again, why we're here today and why we need to create a process that is more understandable and more accessible for community.
Okay, thank you. Auditor Blaha and then Representative Lee.
I have a question on, on note 5 on the statutory authority. And again, you may have already explained this well, but it says nothing can be changed without their written approval. So if the legislature were to say, hey, we're doing this, could the CAP board stop it? It is kind of where does that line fall?
Madam Chair, the legislature created the CAP board. So all it takes for them is to say notwithstanding 15B, and then they just fill in the blank.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Representative Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so just want to say I appreciate the comments that the Lieutenant Governor made earlier. And then Mr. Mendel, this might be to you and to Mr. Kelleher. So Mr. Mendel, you said that right now there's only 3 of you on staff. And so this may be more for the engagement task force too. How do you go about, or is the Historical Societies supporting your work in doing community engagement, especially knowing that we have new Americans here in Minnesota, where if we want to have a reflective capital mall for all communities, that we should be doing outreach to those communities that may have some language barriers. And so having a staff of 3, what are the other partners that you may have? May that be the Historical Society or the Department of Administration doing to support your work in doing that engagement?
David, you want to speak to what the Historical Society is doing this summer on memorials in general?
Sure. And Dr. Bean can certainly add to this, but one of the things that we do at the Minnesota Historical Society is education and bringing people together for conversation on historical issues and issues that are relevant for today. And Dr. Bean was one of our leaders, if not the leader, in setting up a 4-part series talking about monuments and memory. And we had speakers in from a wide variety of communities and areas and disciplines to start the community conversation about the meaning of these places and how they relate to community. I think I would say in addition to that, Representative Lee, one of our other functions is that we run the tours, which we haven't done since March, but run the tours inside the Capitol building. And I think that's certainly an area where we have contact with a lot of people, particularly school children. We have thousands and thousands of school children coming through the building. And that's an area where we do that work, and we can always look at different ways to reach the community, see which schools and which members of the public are coming to visit the Capitol, and try to branch out to make sure that all Minnesotans are welcome to come into the Capitol through that tour function.
And Eric here, I might just jump in quickly, and I don't know if maybe Paul, if Paul might be a good person to speak to this, or Peter, Linda, to just, I have heard you describe a little bit kind of the sort of passive nature by which the ideas for the monuments have come around, if that might be helpful in answering Representative Lee's question.
I'm going to address how several different things got changed after we get through this chart. on the memorials and other artwork. I would say that with regard to trying to address language barriers, we have nowhere near the staff nor the budget to be able to afford anything or go anywhere remotely with that. We've updated our website to try to make it accessible for the disability community and such. But other than that, as far as languages goes, the board never had the ability to do anything about that.
And Paul, I might add, this is Linda, and I think, Eric, you are also referring to the fact that the CAP board does not initiate new memorials nor suggest them. They have come in the past through the community, through people coming to the board or to the legislature and saying, we would like a memorial on the mall or in the building for this individual or this topic. So it is not the CAP board's job to actually initiate memorials. That is something that comes from the citizens of Minnesota, the people of Minnesota.
Then I think I will jump in and also mention that the comprehensive plan that is being drafted has policy that enables this look and that recognizes the need for this process. I think that, and it stops short of making any recommendations, but the idea that this is a process now that is beginning that we have to look at as a way to adapt the way things are being done or change them completely to make them different. It will take resources, of course, but that's certainly it's part of what we've been doing this summer with finishing up the comprehensive plan is simply to enable that vision. And we are very hopeful. I think the CAP board, just speaking for the three of us, very hopeful that this process will help define how we go about doing this adequately on an ongoing basis, but also as a reactive, if we stay as a reactive body, how do we field that in a larger vision of being more holistic about citing hierarchy of places on the wall, and then how's the public engaged, not just when something happens, but early, and then how is that accessible? That is definitely part of what we want to enable. We're enabling within the comprehensive plan, but we're very hopeful that this process will help redefine that. I hope that tried to answer, Mr. Lee, your comment.
Representative Lee, do you have a follow-up before I call on Lindsay Dyer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a comment to follow up on that too. And I'm just concerned that if right now we don't have any process to address some of the language barrier issues that I brought forth, then I just don't know how could we really move forward without having the voices of those other folks. And so hopefully the engagement process task force will come up with a solution to address some of the language barriers that we have regarding this process. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Lindsay.
Hi. I understand that the Capitol has that complicated three owners, if you will, three owners of this process that you just shared. And that said, the Capitol is one building in the state, and certainly there are more state grounds and buildings and art and monuments throughout the state. And when we talk about resources, yes, our task force is focusing on the Capitol, but I'm wondering how the Department of Administration or the Historical Society will use the policies and best practices that we muscle through over the coming months and make that a statewide process and potentially garner more resources for communication.
I'll defer to either Historical Society or Department for that.
If I understood the question, garner more resources for communication. Was that the question, Lindsay?
Well, it just seems like the process that we're looking at could be applied to many different places and grounds and areas of the state that have the exact same issues. And yes, the Capitol is unique, and that's what we're focusing on, but it's one place, and I'm just wondering how and if some of our work might trickle into other spaces. And if it's elevated, then potentially there are additional resources from a statewide, or maybe we're already there. I guess I'm just kind of wondering what makes the Capitol different from, say, the conversations at the Fort or other spaces further out in Minnesota that have similar issues. So, and that said, where the resources come from.
So I'll answer it. I'll answer it in two parts. I think that the processes that we build will have to contemplate that there are really three different partial owners of this process. Will all have to be involved in whatever decisions will be made. But I think that because we're the custodial owners of just this particular piece of land, that they don't really impact other pieces of land across the state. I think that we certainly could share the outcomes with other custodial owners throughout the state and give it to them as a guideline or as an example. But I don't think that it can be something that we would be able to enforce on any other property other than this particular one.
And Eric here, I would just also add that part of it, sort of looking at kind of the suggested timeline in the charter, part of what we have tried to sort of set this group up for success with is sort of considering things that are within the existing statutory authority between MNHS and the CAP board, and that these sort of recommendations could fall within what's sort of our existing authority under law, and then maybe, as the commissioner and others have said, could be a good example for other similar situations around the state.
Thank you, Eric. And all right. And Alex.
Madam Chair, I will point out too, I think David was going to say something, but any state building that is, any new state building has a percent for art program that is then administered by the state arts board, which is a totally separate body too.
Okay. David, were you going to add something?
Yes, thanks, Chair Westerman. I was simply going to add that we're not the only ones wrestling with these issues around the state or the nation or the world. And I think that we will learn from one another. And certainly there have been a handful of high visibility cases of public art in the spotlight, and we are one of them. So people will be looking to us for lessons learned. Back to Lindsay's question, not sure that it would have any direct applicability to a local unit of government, but certainly others will be looking to this group to see what lessons we've learned.
Thank you, David. And Kate, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to mention with the MNHS work, the Monuments and Memorials series that was happening throughout the summer, that was initially a 4-part series. It's a longer term project for sure. You know, there's going to be more engagement. The Minnesota Historical Society is definitely interested in more public education around these larger issues. And so there are conversations about how we can support the public engagement task force and this task force and getting some of that information out there. One of the things that we've also talked about has been the fact that we get a lot of questions at MNHS about some of the processes for not only the Capitol grounds, but other spaces and other public arts throughout the state. And so there is a possibility of, you know, more public education linking to a website which links out to other entities. And again, that's something that we need to talk through, but there's a lot of possibility there.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions or comments about the current statute, policies, and supporting documents? Oh, Dr. Jolly.
Thank you. I just wanted to hearken back to a comment made at the very beginning by Dr. Bean. There is a context for us to evaluate whether or not we're succeeding as we move forward, and that is the issue raised by Mike Forcier when he boldly took down that Columbus statue. It is not isolated. This is not a single event. It's found across the nation. And as I look at this matrix, I couldn't help but be reminded decades ago when I was an assistant chancellor in charge of many things, but including racial issues at a university. We were taken to court because the university police had removed a young black man from the grounds. He was playing chess, but he wasn't enrolled. He decided to represent himself in court, and it brought me to the stand, and I was instructed by our attorneys of the university not to say a thing unless they nodded at me. And so he asked his first question of me, and our attorney said, "Objection, foundation." And the judge just looked at him and told me I should not answer. He tried asking the question again. He said, "Objection, foundation." The attorneys here know all the guy needed to do was ask what my job was so that it showed that I have a right to answer a question about race on campus. But he didn't know that. And we called that justice. I look at this matrix, and there is no way that I would have known how to make a response. And so when I hear no one ever asked to take down a statue before, they did. They just didn't know which of the 20 different state agencies we've divided responsibility to talk to. When I hear there are 3 custodians of the grounds, what we've done is develop the perfect system to be unresponsive to our citizens. There's always someone else to share them with. And when I hear that we don't have the language capacity, that's because we don't have people on staff who speak the languages. It's not the problem of the community. I simply wanted to underscore and thank Dr. Bean for raising this issue, that we have a case study to look back on and say, now, if we were to evaluate our work, would life have worked a little better and our citizens had more access? I really appreciate Paul, Peter, everyone who put together this presentation. David, we've worked together a lot when we were in our museum worlds together. I think you did a wonderful and accurate job of describing a system which is incredibly overlaid with responsibility and underlaid with accountability. And I hope we can find a way to pair those as we move forward. Thank you for taking the time for my small diatribe. I feel so much better now.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other hands up. Any other questions?
Madam Chair, if I could
Comments?
this is Paul
Yes.
again. If there are no
Yes.
questions, I just wanted to run through, because this is about decision-making processes. I wanted to just let you know those cases where things have been changed or have changed. And again, I would invite David or the commissioner at any point to interject. The first one, when I came, we had the USS Ward gun, which was a piece of salvaged a gun from Pearl Harbor. It was the first shot when they spotted one of the enemy submarines in the harbor, and they actually shot and destroyed the submarine. It was moved at one point by the CAAPB board. It had been on John Ireland Boulevard, and we had a proposal from the NAACP members to create a with the Roy Wilkins Memorial. Roy Wilkins being not only a Minnesotan, but a St. Paulite. We moved it closer on board approval. We moved it closer to the Veterans Service Building, which is every December 7th, which of course is usually inclement weather. There were 4 surviving veterans from that gun battery. And so we moved it closer to the Veterans Service Building so they could have their ceremonies and at least hope to get outside for a brief spell of time to celebrate it by the gun. there was the Governor Perpich portrait that the commissioner talked about yesterday, or I should say, former commissioner talked about yesterday, when the Perpich portrait, the Governor Perpich wanted a second portrait. The CAP board ruled that you can only get one, and it has to be an oil painting. And that the oil painting standard is a standard that the Historical Society and CAP board have done. What was presented to us was basically an enlarged photograph with brushstrokes of varnish on top of it, and a certificate saying it wouldn't last long if exposed to light. Dana explained the circumstances. It took a full board meeting to say no, and eventually the legislature said if the Perpiches pay for the second one themselves, they can have a replacement portrait painted and replace his original portrait with the second one. So that was a legislative act. Since the state had already paid for one portrait, he could replace it, but they had to provide the money for it. In the mid-90s, we were approached by the Philippine Study Group, which was a group that had found errors in what the 13th Regiment plaque, which is in the Court of Honor, talking about how the Americans freed the Philippines from the Spanish, which was true, but then it failed to mention that the Filipinos had to fight against the Americans to get their independence. It also mentioned that the chief was very appreciative of the Americans. Well, he was a chief, he was a chief, but he was also a duly elected president. And it also accounted for the number of Americans lost, but it did not account for the Filipinos lost. So the CAP board, after a lengthy process and modifications of the policy inside working with the Historical Society, decided, and the client group was very, very pleased, we added a second plaque that is now right there next to it, explaining the inaccuracies and telling the actual story. So that was a win-win for just about everyone. I think sometime in the 90s, the House decided they wanted their retiring clerk, Ed Burdick, they wanted a bust to Ed Burdick. So they basically declared that the vestibule outside the House chamber was their space, not historic and public space. And then they created a bust and put it there on their volition. Then during the restoration project, and Dr. Westerman is very, very aware of this, there were two paintings removed from the Capitol, the Battle of Killdeer Mountain, otherwise known as Taha Kuti, and the Battle of New Ulm. Those were removed from the Capitol building. And I believe Historical Society has them in possession. I don't know where. And then two paintings were moved and relocated so they could be interpreted. And those were the two paintings that are up on the third floor that used to be at the two ends of the governor's reception room, and now are more fully interpreted up in the third floor. And then lastly, there was the Civil War, that during the restoration, there were the Civil War paintings. And Governor Dayton at the time was saying that he would prefer that it not just be Civil War paintings there, that he wanted more diversity representing Minnesotans. It was unfortunately poorly conveyed and poorly represented. So a lot of people were up in arms, well, what's wrong with the Civil War paintings? But it was just that he wanted more of a variety of paintings in the reception room. So the CAP board, I think Historical Society tried once and didn't get a vote. This CAP board had a split vote, 6-5, to agree with the governor and not put them back. And then the Historical Society had, I believe, a unanimous decision to put them back, and then eventually work at some time on replacing the two that were removed, the two Native American pieces, which are still at this time blank pieces. And the Historical Society is the final arbiter on those historic spaces. So that gives you a full gamut of changes that have happened either through legislative procedures or through CAP board or through Historical Society. And again, I'll remind you what Linda said. We don't know, no memorials or artwork originates with us. If the legislature wants to, they start something, or a person, it's been everything from a corporate leader to a single mom, along with some veterans from Vietnam, who basically started radio ads, and a legislator picked up on it. They were fundraising with T-shirt sales and bumper sticker sales. And that's how it started. So it was nickels and dimes. We've had a lot of proposals for things like battalion flags, and we've turned down probably as many as we've accepted. Things like someone wanted a Bob Hope statue, and we weren't sure if Bob Hope had ever been to Minnesota or what it represented in the way of statewide significance. And we've had public art. We usually don't do just public art. It's commemorative of some nature. So a lot of times we'll get into discussion with somebody. There's also the plaques in the Court of Honor that acknowledge members of the armed forces by statute. They have to be members of the armed forces. And it's been everything from Mexican Americans to Native Americans, et cetera. So that's the full gamut. I don't know if I've raised more questions than answered, but hopefully I've given you a sampling of how things do get done here.
And Paul, before we get too far out on time here, I'm wondering if we could go back to the slides and just go through a few words at least on each of the two policies.
Sure. Start with the Commemorative Works 2012. This document had been updated several times. As I said, this acknowledges and sets out very, very clearly in just a few pages how one creates a memorial, how one creates a commemorative space. It has to be of statewide significance. If it's a person, it should be a person who has been dead for at least 10 years to make sure that test of time that the person is important enough. Usually when we get a legislative request to memorialize something, in the same time they're asking us to add a new memorial, they're also cautioning that we're using up space. So over time, from the Vietnam Memorial on down to the Medal of Honor, we've narrowed down and tightened up the spaces, but this addresses how one creates a memorial. And you start with an application, we go through site selection, design criteria, et cetera, but you have to have the funds and raise the funds, and then the legislature sometimes will, but not always, create a match. The policy on the Capitol building is a work that, again, Jennifer Jones, David, myself, and others have been working on revisions even to the 2015. And the 2015 version that you'll find does not lay out all the spaces as they were restored during the most recent restoration. For instance, it doesn't show the new public spaces on the third floor, which used to be offices, or the basement, because of course the basement was basically a tunnel with the Rathskeller. So those drawings in the back of that document do not reflect current reality. So that's in works. And I know Jennifer has been working with her board on some updates that have yet to be taken or put forward. But again, this is a joint document that, and you see the statute, the 138 and 15B that we work through. Questions? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. That's a lot of information. And we appreciate the time you took to go through it and to point out where you see gaps in the policies as well. Any other questions? I don't see any hands up. No? Okay. All right then. Thank you very much. We can take the PowerPoint down. There we go. Thank you. Yep. Thank you, David and Paul. Certainly gives us a lot to think about here. All right. We are at about 15 minutes left in the meeting. Do you have any reactions or other discussion about the presentation? Task force members. I know it's a lot to think about. Okay. What questions do you have about the current policies that we can begin to think about as we prepare for the next phase of our work here? What questions do you have about current policies? Dana.
Madam Chair, this is going to be a little bit out of left field, but I'm a public member of this group and I'm not intimately connected with the issues surrounding the Christopher Columbus statue. I know what I read in the paper. Are there any facts concerning what has happened to that statue? What is the Historical Society responsible for its disposition? I know it's not technically within the purview of this group, but I think it would be useful to have whatever facts we know about that that episode, other than what I've read in the paper. Are there any others that would be relevant to this group's discussion?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Right now, the Department of Administration has custody of the statue. We've got it stored in an off-site location where it's secure. We don't have any plans to return it right now, so it will remain off-site until some sort of decision is made as to where it should go.
Is that helpful, Dana?
I guess there must be some process then with respect to that decision, and is that within the purview of this group?
I think it will be. I think it will be. There should be some sort of process around how we decide what the process is for requesting removal of a statue or replacement of a statue. And that's what we'll get to through this process, I presume.
Yes. Jennifer.
I was just going to add that from the standpoint of the Historical Society, because the statue there was never a decision made to remove the statue. The way it came down was outside of any policy. The Historical Society has not taken on its statutory role, which would otherwise would. In the case of monuments, it would be responsible for disposition, but we're not involved right now because there hasn't been an actual decision to remove the statue.
Okay.
Thank you. That's also helpful information. Not out of left field. Relevant.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions about current policy? Policies? Lindsay?
Hi. I'm wondering, as we go forward, I know you're going to probably get to this next, but the next steps on looking at these more closely and coming up with ideas. I'm really concerned about the scope because I believe Paul mentioned that there isn't public art. It sounds like there isn't much of a program to bring in new art that's supported by a staff that is ready to develop that and have that language, which was brought up too. So I'm wondering, I don't know, I just hope that we're very clear on what we're able to affect with regards to the policies. And I'm just concerned about the support and the resources and if and how we will get ahead of ourselves when there isn't that infrastructure. Or is there?
Eric, are you going to respond or are you just thinking?
Yeah, I certainly would welcome someone else to jump in first if they wanted, but I also can provide at least a thought from the discussions I've been part of to this point.
Okay.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
Yes.
Paul, I would just add, as I noted, when there's a new state building, i.e. The Department of Agriculture building, the Revenue building, these buildings, when they are created, carry with them a % for art that the State Arts Board does. So those would be the general rule. Those would be the times when non-commemorative, just public art, which is done again through the State Arts Board. The state has also started back in 2014 memorializing the buildings, so as we don't have to put memorials all over the grounds. So you have the Freeman building, you have the Stassen building, you have the Anderson building. So while it is the state campus, this public art, like the Judicial Plaza that you see right across just outside the state capitol, was a % for art for the judicial, and there is also a skylight that was part of their % for art.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
I would just maybe make the point, getting back to the question that I think we've hoped to set this group up to make recommendations around additions and changes to the existing policy, and certainly you'd want to keep in mind the sort of constraints of the resources that are available, or just for making recommendations that could reasonably be implemented, to keep in mind the limitations of the existing resources. But at the same time, I don't think anyone here wants to sort of come in too pre-prescribed about the direction to go in those recommendations.
Thank you, Eric. Jessica, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Paul, I appreciate your noting the funding that's available for additional art in new buildings. But you also talked about how it was a win-win to add interpretation to existing monuments where that was perhaps an untold story. Do we have any resource allocations, or does the CAP board have available any additional for that reinterpretation where necessary?
Madam Chair, no. The CAP board has no extra resources whatsoever. I think in the particular case of the Philippine group, I would have to go back. I believe it was state funded through a bill of the legislature once we came to the final determination that we would add an additional plaque. At one point, we were going to take down the old one and just get rid of the whole history. So once they came to an amenable and very happy solution, I think that the legislature appropriated a certain amount of funds for that.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, Dana. Oh, you're muted.
I think we're getting the impression here that there's a void, and I'm really eager to make sure that we understand the Historical Society plays a really important role in that reinterpretation. I believe the reinterpretation of the works that came out of the governor's reception area was interpreted by the Historical Society. And the public spaces now in the Capitol, which have a rotating series of art displays, including one which was mentioned earlier today on Muslims in Minnesota. I mean, that was done by the Historical Society, as I understand it. So I think we must not forget that they do play a really important role in bringing art of various kinds to the Capitol and interpreting it. Is that not right?
Yes, Madam Chairman, yes, we do have that responsibility. Those new third floor spaces and other spaces are actually managed by a group that's facilitated through the Department of Administration. But in the public and ceremonial spaces, yes, we do have that responsibility. And I will say that the Minnesota Historical Society is not without resources, but we're also not sitting on a fund that's easily tapped to make something instantly happen. I would say that a few years ago, right at sort of the culmination of the renovation of the state capitol, there's a lot of support within the Historical Society and a lot of conversation within the Historical Society about going ahead and creating some sort of commission public input process to replace those two spaces that were vacated by the Traverse de Sioux and Father Hennepin relocation. But we ran into issues there in that the current policies didn't really, allow for a clear-cut way of moving forward. So it's a little circular right now. But in general, what you're saying is true, that the Minnesota Historical Society within the Capitol itself has a very important role to play in terms of providing interpretation, particularly in the public and ceremonial spaces.
Thank you. I think that's a good entry into what our expectations are for the next meeting, and focusing on the goals that we have as a task force. The first one is a comprehensive review of the CAP board policies and procedures. The second one is to identify gaps, and I think we are beginning to see where those gaps are, whether it's the application process for the public, whether it's additional interpretation, process for adding and removing and maintaining. This has been very helpful today to hear what the current policies are, so that we can begin to identify those gaps. Okay. Any other expectations for our next meeting? Is that enough? Too much? So yes, let's take a look, another look at those CAP board policies and procedures, and come ready next time to talk about the gaps that we see that are readily noticeable. Representative Lee talked about language barriers. We talked about accessibility barriers as well. Representative Lee, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I just have a request for, I think, CADS and the Historical Society or whoever put together the matrix. I think that the matrix is great. Even for myself, I feel like still don't really understand who has the final say on some of these. And so if we could use, for example, we have for Capitol Building Interior Review Advisor for all three across the board, then who has the final say with regards to that piece of it? And then, moving on to the grounds, we have concept approval, site selection, or for any all changes for CADS, and then Historical Society and Department of Admin, just wanting to figure out, kind of to like the point that Dr. Jolly made earlier, how can we make this digestible for folks who may not be in and around the Capitol for all of us?
Okay, that's a great recommendation for us to think about in preparation for the next meeting. Okay, that's a lot to digest, and I'm looking forward to further conversations on those policies, 15B, and what was the other one, 35?
138.
138, yep, thank you. So we are just about right at time for our meeting to end, and let's take just a quick round and tell me one word to describe how you're feeling after today. And we'll go in alphabetical order. I'll start. Overwhelmed, although that's not alphabetical order. Overwhelmed. Jason.
Next time we should go in reverse alphabetical order. Okay. I'll say informed.
Okay, good. Kate.
Contemplative.
Oh, you're kind of cutting out. repeat that?
Contemplative.
Okay. Contemplative. Auditor Blaha.
Full.
Full?
As in, my head is full. I think
okay.
Hit the fill point.
I hear that. All right. Lindsay Dyer.
Good.
Okay, good. Jessica.
Challenged.
All right. Dr. Jolly.
Challenged.
Okay. Jennifer.
My word is also challenged.
Okay. Tish.
Inundated.
Yes. Representative Lee.
Learning.
Good. Commissioner Roberts Davis. Oh, did I miss it?
You raised some good questions, so I'm going to go with puzzled.
Puzzled. All right. And Daniel Yang.
I'll say informed.
Okay, good. Yes, my head is full. And next time we will go in reverse alphabetical order. Thank you very much for your participation today, your attention to detail, your questions, your responses. I think we're progressing, and we know we've got challenging work ahead of us, and I really appreciate that all of you are on board to help improve this process and make good recommendations that others can use to help change policy. So let's see, Eric, am I missing anything?
Sorry, I just somehow got booted from the meeting, but I think we're good.
Okay. Schedule for next meeting?
Yep, we'll Emmett or I'll get an email out in the next couple of days on
Okay.
I think we're looking at a November time.
Okay, great. And again, thank you very much for spending this beautiful sunny afternoon inside in our virtual spaces. And Pidamaya, yeah.